Welcome to another episode of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm your host, Lee Fisher, Dean of Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University. You know, I've had the great privilege to live my life at the intersection of the public, private, nonprofit, and academic worlds. As a lawyer, CEO of two nonprofit organizations, and as a state legislator, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. And the lessons I've learned come down to just two words: justice and leadership. That's why every week we'll talk to people who are walking the walk. Some are lawyers and some are not, but all of them have something in common. They are change makers. They are guardians of justice. They are living justice, and they are living leadership. Welcome everyone for another edition of Living Justice, Living Leadership. I'm very honored today to have a very special guest. She is the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor. And when you listen to her bio, you'll realize that she's far more than just a judge. First of all, Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor was the first woman to lead the Ohio judicial branch. That in of itself makes history, but there's a lot more. She's had a very, very distinguished career, and I want to tell you all the different things that she's done. In addition to being a Chief Justice, and before that, a Justice, she was the prosecuting attorney for Summit County. She was a judge on the Summit County Court of Common Pleas. She was a magistrate at Summit County Probate Court, attorney in private practice, and my favorite office, Lieutenant Governor. She was Lieutenant Governor of the state of Ohio. I personally think it's the most important office in the state of Ohio, more important than governor, but some people might disagree. And of course, you know, the reason I say that is that one of the things that Chief Justice and I have in common is we both held that position. When she was Lieutenant Governor to Governor Bob Taft, she also was Director of the Ohio Department of Public Safety. One of the things I'm most proud of is that she's also a graduate of Cleveland Marshall Law School at Cleveland State University, where I have the privilege of serving as Dean. She is in our Hall of Fame. She was in the very first class of our Hall of Fame. And she's gotten so many awards, way too many to mention. But I will also tell you, we share the same birth date. I'm not going to tell you the year, but I will tell you the date. It's August 7th. So you can send both of us a gift. But you'll never know the year. We're not going to reveal that today. You should also know that as the Chief Justice, she's also had a remarkable career. And not just in Ohio, but nationally. She was the past president of the National Conference of Chief Justices. She's the past chair of the National Center for State Courts. She served as co-chair of the National Task Force on Fines and Fees and Bail Practices. And we're going to talk a lot, particularly in our second episode, about her time as Chief Justice. So I want to welcome our guest, Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor. Welcome today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to spend the first part of our interview today talking about you, the person, where you grew up, all those kinds of things that many people probably don't know that sometimes aren't even in your bio. So let's start with where you were born, where you grew up, what your childhood was like. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was born in Washington, D.C. I happened to be born there because my father was a student at Georgetown Dental School. And I was the second child born in a family of 8 children. My sister and I were both born in D.C. She's a year older than I am. And my father graduated, and then we came to Cleveland, which is where my mother's family was from. And that's where we settled in Parma, Ohio. My dad was a longtime practitioner of dentistry in Parma. Mother was a housewife. And as I said, there were 8 children in the family. I came from a pretty close-knit family. My grandparents also lived in Parma. I had cousins, one family of 10 cousins, another family of 7 cousins, and we were all, in the area, Parma, Middleburg Heights, that sort of thing. So there were a lot of family gatherings, and, that's pretty much the family structure. I went to St. Francis de Sales grade school. And then the family moved to Strongsville when I was in 4th grade. And I finished at St. Joseph's grade school there, and on to Nazareth Academy for high school, which is now Holy Name. It's no
Yes.
longer an all-girls high school, which is what it was when I was there. And then left for college.
Are there any other members of your family, any of your siblings who've gone into public service?
No, nobody who works for the government or, well, I have an older sister who's a teacher, and that I
Okay.
would think is close. She's retired, but elective office, no, no.
If we would have asked you when you were in grade school what you wanted to be when you grew up, what would you have said?
A nun.
Really?
Well, that was the
Interesting.
first, you get that idea, and yet I have to tell you that my grandfather had several siblings, sisters who were sisters. They were members of, they had joined the convent, as was, early 1900s and, up to the 19 teens. That's kind of the thing that every family had, some children who entered either the priesthood or the convent.
Right.
And so I had that influence, and I thought that life seemed, pretty attractive. And so around second grade, third grade, I thought that would be a great thing to do. In fact, my great aunt, who was head of the home ec department at Ursuline College, for my first communion, made me a nun outfit.
That's
So
good.
to say that they were encouraging my vocation, it was an understatement. That didn't last very long. I do remember in sixth grade, I was in a history class, social studies, I guess I would call it, and there's a debate going on about local taxes, and it was something that we had to read information about and then take one side or the other. And I took a position. And I remember my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Bettinger, telling me that my arguments were so good that I should be a lawyer.
Very
And that's the
interesting.
first time that I considered, thought about it. And so I guess it was kind of in the back of my mind for the longest time.
Did Mr. Bettinger ever get to see you get
No,
elected to the Supreme Court?
no. Oh, no, I really have lost track.
Well, it doesn't mean, even if you've lost track with him, it doesn't mean he has lost track with you. If I were
Well,
Mr. Bettinger, I'd be boasting to everybody that was my student. So that was the key. That was the time we moved from nun to potential lawyer.
right,
Uh,
right.
at what point did you decide that not only did you want to be a lawyer, but you'd also perhaps wanted to be in elected public office?
Well, I didn't go straight, for the law degree. It was kind of a circuitous path, because when I went to college, I was going to major in biology and,
Mm-hmm.
become a physician. And, then I decided that wasn't a good fit. And then, anyway, I ended up with an recent American history degree in sociology and English. So, I worked for about a year. Traveled for about a year, and then decided that I was going to do something, go to graduate school. I did go to graduate school in teaching, and I finished and did my student teaching, and I realized that I didn't like children well enough to be a teacher for the rest of my life. And I always tell folks that thousands of children have benefited from that decision.
Although I would argue you're still affecting children in a different way.
Yeah, but so anyway, then I decided, I went to, that I was going to go to law school. I applied to one law school. It was Cleveland Marshall. And I always tell people that it's students, especially, it's just important to figure out what you don't want to do is what you want to do.
Yes.
Try something on. If it doesn't fit, if it's not what you feel comfortable doing, don't feel bad about saying, what, this isn't right for me. Because then you're never going to wonder, could I have done that? And don't be afraid don't trap yourself into a situation, a profession, a career, a direction, out of obligation. Life is full of challenges and changes, and take advantage of that.
You have to be pivot, you have to pivot, you have to be flexible. And of course,
Right.
going after this last year with COVID, we all know you have to be resilient. And you certainly have in your career. And we're going to go through that career and people will see how resilient you've been. But let's go back to Cleveland Marshall Law School for a second. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
I was just in awe when I went to law school. I didn't know, exactly what to expect at law school. I was, trying to be as conscientious as I could. I remember the first couple of weeks, just being so afraid that I was going to fall behind or I wasn't going to get it or whatever. And I was concerned that I wasn't going to know all the terminology. So believe it or not, I walked around. This is crazy. I walked around with a Black's Law Dictionary, carried it around from class to class, just in the off chance I was going to have a term that I needed to look up.
And that's a pretty big book.
I know. I mean, I had a bruise on my forearm, the inside of my forearm, until I realized that, that really wasn't necessary to do. It didn't take me long to figure out that wasn't necessary to do, but that's just kind of, something that I wanted to do. But I was, the reading was fascinating, I thought, and the method, of teaching and the Socratic method of asking questions and eliciting responses and then taking it a step further and then applying an hypothetical, and that was just, well, you're not taught like that in any other area. So I really enjoyed it. I liked law school. I tell people that, and there's so many people that would tell me how much they hated law school, and I didn't exactly understand why. What was there to hate? I didn't. You were there to learn, and you had good teachers and good methodology. And I do have to mention that during law school I had two children.
Not easy to do.
Yeah. I had my first child at the end of my second year, and then my second child the August after that.
That's Alex and Ed, right?
Right, and they I had Ed the day after I graduated. So I tell people timing is everything, and so I got out of law school with.
That means during final exams you could have given birth any moment.
As a matter of fact, yes, yeah, and when yeah, I mean I could have, sure.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. I mean, final exams are hard enough, but to be wondering whether during the multiple choice or the essay, you might actually give birth to your first child, that would be difficult.
Right. But, it's probably a little tougher to just spend 2 years pregnant in law school.
That's a good point. Yes.
But I did get to ride the elevator as, because it was forbidden for students to use the elevator, but I got special permission to use the elevator. Probably so I wouldn't go in labor.
I love that. That's great. That's great. So when you graduate, you went into private practice for a couple of years, handling both criminal and civil cases, as I recall. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And tell us about that.
Well, with two small children, I just kind of hung out a shingle. I didn't want to get into any situation where I couldn't control my time. So I learned about the court appointment system. I opened a small office in Copley, Ohio, and I found myself, local business people would come to me, to represent them in small lawsuits and things like that. But I also was on the court appointment list, so I got appointments from the municipal courts to represent criminal defendants, the juvenile court, appointments to represent parents whose parental rights were in jeopardy, and then probate. I represented folks in probate court as well, which transitioned into my role as a magistrate.
Yes.
From probate court, I had had several trials in probate, and there became an opening because the magistrate, the probate magistrate, had been elected to the bench. That was Judge Mary Spicer from Summit County, and they were looking for a magistrate. And one of the magistrates suggested that I apply. Would I be interested in applying? And I said, sure, I'll take a look at it. So I did, and make a long story short, I got the job. And then that kind of was my foray into public service.
I'm sure there's a lot of people listening or watching who don't really know what a magistrate is. What is a magistrate?
Magistrate is like an appointed judicial officer. The judge in the local court, here it was Judge Spicer in probate court, had 4 magistrates at the time that were the managers of the dockets. I had guardianship cases, estate cases, all the adoptions that were done through probate court, and there were involuntary commitments for those that are suffering from mental illness and are a danger to themselves or others. And so that was the caseload. Name changes, everything that's on the probate docket. It's kind of difficult for one judge to handle the entire probate docket in a county the size of Summit County or any of the larger counties. So there were 4 magistrates there, and I was chosen to be one of them.
And 10 years after you were appointed, you run for office for the Summit County Court of Common Pleas. Is that right?
No, actually, I was appointed to the Common Pleas Court by Governor Voinovich.
I see.
And so in 93 is when I, became a Common Pleas Court judge. There was an opening in the Common Pleas Court, and the governor appointed me.
So go back to that very first campaign, because a political campaign is a whole nother beast, as you well know. And tell us what that was like. Even though you were an incumbent, you were an appointed incumbent. So it's a little bit different.
First you have to realize that I did not win my first election. I ran from the position of magistrate several times for judge. Back then that was kind of the pattern in the local party that you had to, quote, pay your dues.
Rite of passage.
Yeah, and I always considered you had to be like cannon fodder, and run. My first campaign was against the late Judge John Judge, who was
what a name.
Yes, he was the incumbent in the Barberton Municipal Court, and I was living in Copley, and that was the jurisdiction. So I ran against Judge Judge, who was a wonderful gentleman, and I had appeared in front of him when I was practitioner, and so it was a very amicable race. And back then there was a lot of pounding signs into yards and all that kind of stuff. It was very grassroots, which is totally different than running statewide, as you can imagine. Sure. But that was something that I learned with each campaign, what to do, what not to do. But the important thing was that you didn't let your first or second defeat deter you from your goal, which was to be a judge. I'm not sure that goes on anymore. I don't know that. I since paying more attention to it, there's a lot of people that run once and say, never again, not going to do that again. It's just no fun. No, it's not fun to lose. It's not fun to lose at anything. Plus, it's not fun to lose at a public campaign where, it's in the newspaper that you lost.
Exactly.
But that did not deter me. I was determined, and so I did, as I said, I was appointed. The party recommended me to the governor. I was appointed, and then I had to, stand for election. And so by that time, the running countywide was not unfamiliar, and so I was elected, and it was a successful campaign. I thoroughly enjoyed being a Common Pleas Court judge. I thought it was the best job that you could have with a law degree. And I thought, well, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. This is the career that people do attain, and then they want to do it for the rest of their life.
And most judges do. That's right.
Yes, I can perfectly understand that. Absolutely. But I got elected in November. I was on the bench for a couple years before I had to stand for election. So I got elected in November, and the gentleman who was a prosecuting attorney was elected to the Ninth District Court of Appeals. So that was a vacancy in the prosecuting attorney's office. And
Who was that?
That was Lynn Slaby.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. And so he went to the Ninth District Court of Appeals, and there was a vacancy in the office. And from my perspective as a judge, that was too important of a job to let just go to any political appointee.
Right.
Because the party would fill that vacancy. That's the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the party leadership and I said, I will resign. Now, mind you, I had just been elected by 70% of the vote. I want to resign from being a judge to become the county prosecuting attorney. It's too important of a job to let go to anybody that doesn't have the perspective. It was not only was it the civil division and the criminal division, like any other prosecuting attorney's office, but the prosecuting attorney also ran the child support enforcement agency. And there's only one entity in a county that affects more children than the child support enforcement agency, and that's our school system. So that gives you a perspective on how important this agency was. And I found out while I was, contemplating running or taking this job, that the Children's Defense Fund had rated all of the child support enforcement agencies in the state, all 88. And Summit County was 87th out of 88 for effectiveness. And so I knew there was only one way to go, and that was up.
There might be one way you go down.
Well, no, because I said then, and I probably improvidently that the 88th was Cuyahoga County, and I knew that they weren't going to surpass us.
Right.
So anyway, I knew how important that job was. So I took the job. And 2 years later, we were nominated for 2 national awards for the way the Child Support Enforcement Agency was run. And it was nominated for the most improved agency in the country.
That's fantastic.
So it was that was purely a tribute to the people that I hired, which has kind of been my secret of success, not such a big secret. Hire people that know what they're doing, that are smarter than you, and let them do it and listen to them. And, they're going to make you look good.
It's a great leadership and management lesson. And as obvious as it may sound, a lot of leaders don't do that. They think that they are good enough leaders, they can do it themselves. And almost always they fail as a result.
Yeah.
You've mentioned, by the way, losing an election. And I will say that I'm hard pressed to think of a person who has been successful at higher levels like you and others who hasn't lost at least one election. And although it's not impossible to win every election, it's very rare. And in fact, I would argue you're probably a better elected official for having lost once or twice. Now, I lost a couple more times than I would have liked, but nonetheless, I still think that's true. And the office of prosecuting attorney, in my view, it may very well be the single most powerful office on a county level. In some ways, it's as powerful, if not more powerful than a mayor. And a lot of people don't realize it unless, of course, they're before the county prosecutor in a case. And then they realize how important that position is. Can you talk a little bit more about what happened in those 5 years? Are there any particular cases that stand out in your mind?
There were the ones that I thought were most troubling, not just for me, but for the staff, because I had a lot of female assistant prosecutors. I hired, it didn't matter, male or female, but I did happen to hire a lot of female assistants, and many of those women went on to be judges. But the child death cases and the cases that involved abuse of children, and especially by their own parents or the mom's boyfriend, those were extremely hard cases. I still, as a justice, when I'm reading those cases about the murder of babies and children, it affects me. It truly does. But historically that did when I was prosecuting attorney as well.
Sure.
Another type of case that used to just kind of boggle my mind was felony domestic violence, and the recanting of the information that was shared by the woman who was, abused, beaten up, feloniously assaulted, and their willingness to drop all charges. They, had women beg me to drop the charges against their husbands or boyfriends. So that was a challenge. I never did. I never did that, and I always insisted that pictures be taken, as part of the protocol, so that when they're healed and it's 6 months later or so, that you've got those pictures that are going to document the just savagery that was inflicted upon women who found themselves in just, I was very sympathetic because they were in such horrible situations, to want their abuser back in the house. But those were tough cases. Surprisingly, some of the civil cases were pretty challenging. We had the only form of a council form of government with a county executive in Summit County at the time. Now Cuyahoga has it, but Summit County was the only one. And we had a county executive who had his own attorneys, had hired attorneys.
Was that Tim Davis?
It was.
Yes, I remember. Okay.
And there were a couple court cases that kind of, defined the role of the prosecuting attorney in light of county council, and a county executive and their legal counsel, general counsel. And our position was, you're not going to diminish the role of the county prosecuting attorney in representing the civil end of the county government. Yes. Simply because you've hired, your general counsel, and we prevailed. We prevailed in the Supreme Court. O'Connor versus Davis is, or Davis versus O'Connor, I can't remember which is the case that kind of sets that up, and it defines what prosecutors, what their role is in light of that type of a situation.
Well, it's interesting because when I served as Attorney General, I had a very similar situation with Governor Voinovich, because Governor Voinovich hired a lot of his lawyers. And so we sometimes had a conflict between whether or not he should be using his lawyers or the lawyers in the Attorney General's office, because our client was the governor. And so I relate to that very much. Now, at some point, you transition to a judicial career, which has been extremely successful and extremely noteworthy. Talk a little bit about the transition from prosecuting attorney to being elected in November 2002 to the Ohio Supreme Court.
Well, the interim was lieutenant governor.
Oh, how could I forget? That's right. That's right. Because we go back to 1998. In fact, I guess I should remind our viewers that Justice O'Connor beat me in that race. She was the running mate for Bob Taft. I was running for governor. My running mate was Michael Coleman, who later became mayor of Columbus. It's how Chief Justice O'Connor and I first met and found out we were born on the same day.
Right.
And that was quite and Bob Taft and Maureen O'Connor won that election, and she went on to be lieutenant governor. So let's back up, and I apologize for forgetting that most important office. Let's talk about that 1998 campaign. What do you remember about that?
It was unlike anything, to run statewide, to have the, the handlers that you have in a situation. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. The people who do politics for a living, and their vision of what the campaign should look like, their vision of what you should say when you're coached, with questions, and then the policy decisions and that sort of thing was not something that I was used to. But I see you got to make sure that two candidates are speaking with one voice. They're right. Talking about the policies, developing the policies. I thought was a very interesting process, and learning the array of concerns from the state level that you had to be versed in, so that you could answer questions when the constituents asked them. You had to learn rather quickly an awful lot. Now, I had to. Bob Taft had been Secretary of State, so Bob knew so much more, and rightfully so. But it was a pretty quick learned that I had to do in order to get up to speed to campaign statewide. I remember it being kind of a grueling experience. You'd take bus trips, and you'd stop at all these, places, and you'd do the event, or you'd have the press conference, or that sort of thing. And then, that went on for the duration of the campaign, and then it gets to be election night, and you're waiting for the results, which are they're kind of predicted because everybody's doing polling. That was another thing.
Right.
Nobody did polling in the local races. Why would they? But statewide, you're always being apprised of what this poll said or that poll said. And, back, at that point, newspapers were much more influential than they are now.
Much more.
It's just a fact of life. And so that was a huge concentration on how you're going to get the endorsement of the various newspapers. And there was a very clear division between the reporters and the editors and the editorial boards. So it didn't matter if you were popular with a particular, newspaper reporter, because you had to then, do the editorial boards, and they kind of had a different agenda. So that was all brand new. I adapted quickly to that, figured it out, participated. Lieutenant governor, as was explained to me, nobody votes for a ticket because of the lieutenant governor. So don't think you're all that in a box of chocolates, because that's just not the way it was. So was Taft O'Connor.
By the way, that's not entirely true, because I remember back in that race, I thought that I was going to get the FOP endorsement because I had been Attorney General. And my recollection
kind of got that away from you, didn't I?
My recollection is that it swung towards Bob Taft because of you, because the FOP in Akron was very powerful, swung a lot of votes, and they were ardent fans of Maureen O'Connor. And I remember I wondered, because I thought I was going to get it. And I asked somebody, how could that have happened? And they said, it's because Maureen O'Connor was able to sway the FOP in Akron, and it went for the FOP. So don't diminish the role of the lieutenant governor, because you got a very important endorsement in that race that I'm still a little sore about even to this day.
Well, you got to be upset with but all those police officers are probably retired by now anyway. But a funny anecdote: I had an employee from the prosecuting attorney's office who was wearing a Taft O'Connor T-shirt, and it was green. And he and his wife went to Ireland, and he was wearing the T-shirt over there during the campaign. And the Irish came up to him and said, "We've heard of O'Connor, but who the hell's Taft?"
In the Irish community, that makes perfect sense to me.
But this was Dublin.
Yeah, but that's all the more reason why I think the truth of the matter is that I do think you immensely helped Bob Taft. Now, Bob Taft was a great candidate and a great name, but I think he wisely picked you. And by the way, speaking of picking you, how did that happen? Because you can't campaign to be somebody's lieutenant governor. So what had happened there?
There was a profile that I think that they were looking for, as always, and they were looking for, they weren't necessarily looking for a woman, because I know some of the other candidates that were in the running for it, and they weren't female, but law enforcement was important to them, having someone who was, prosecutorial background, and I had both judicial and prosecutorial at that time, so that was attractive, and someone, turns out had a good ballot name. No skeletons in the closet, and would be a team player, and that is a huge thing, because if you're leading the ticket like Bob was, you don't want to bring on a wild card. And I had respect for Bob Taft. I had respect for the process, and I knew that this was not my show entirely, that it was a team effort. So that's basically, I think, what needed to be considered and was considered when I was selected.
Well, the main reason you were selected is you had been an outstanding prosecutor, but I will add one more reason why I think you were selected, and that is Bob Taft was running against someone from Cleveland. and it was important to have somebody from Northeast Ohio.
Northeast Ohio. You're right. That was a consideration.
And that was a big piece of it. And so I can tell you, I was not happy that day that I found out that he had chosen you, because I actually thought that going into that race, one of the advantages I brought to the table was Northeast Ohio. And I thought, gee, that was smart, bringing in Maureen O'Connor, because she brings so much to the table, not the least of which is that she's from vote-rich Summit County and has a great name also for Cuyahoga County.
Right.
So it proved to be, to me, an instrumental decision in his victory and my defeat. So thanks a lot. I appreciate that very much.
Well, look at your successes since then, Lee. That's what I always tell people. Sometimes it's a blessing. God has plans for you, and if you don't have Plan B, don't run for Plan A, because you can't be devastated by loss. You can't. You got to pivot. Just what we started out talking about. There's better things to come down the road, and.
You're right,
I think we're both
why
examples.
Today I'm here to thank you for defeating me that day. That's exactly right.
That's my point.
I'll be eternally grateful. That's exactly right.
That's my point. Yeah.
Now, while you were lieutenant governor, you also were the governor's main criminal justice advisor, obviously, because of your background. You were also director of Department of Public Safety, and one of the first lieutenant governors to hold a cabinet position. What was it like to balance both a cabinet position and be lieutenant governor?
Well, Lee, there are no statutory duties at that time for the lieutenant governor. So you were like the Maytag repairman. You were a spare part on the shelf in case somebody needed you. Thank God nobody did for that role to step in for the governor. But I needed a real job and a full-time job, because lieutenant governor was a part-time job. And so I could have balanced it. I could have practiced law and also be lieutenant governor at the time, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be public safety director, and public safety is the highway patrol, liquor enforcement, Bureau of Motor Vehicles, emergency management, and emergency services, and it just really fascinating divisions within the department, and I really had a great time. The people that were involved in those departments, fabulous. Working, with the highway patrol. I always said it's one of the greatest organizations. All I had to do was think of something, and they would have it done, or they'd be on the track to incorporate, a program or initiative or whatever. They were just so efficient and professional. Public, Bureau of Motor Vehicles, that never has been anybody's favorite organization, but we introduced so many improvements, and we introduced the concept of having a one-stop shop where you'd have the bureau for licensing, which would go with the county clerk, so that you could get your license and you could get your registration and all that.
Yes.
And so that improved. And one of the things that happened was 9/11 when I was lieutenant governor, and that catapulted the emergency management agency, which was in my department, to the center front. Before that, emergency management was always brought out when there was a natural disaster. There'd be floods along the Ohio River, or tornado, or some other natural disaster, and they would respond, marshal the assets, get a National Guard on the ground. So that was what they were used to. But in preparation, once 9/11, we had to take a real hard look at how prepared we were in the event we had some kind of disaster in Ohio. And it was a national initiative. If you remember, Governor Ridge from Pennsylvania became the first Homeland Security Director, and so I was back and forth to Washington all the time for meetings. And what became abundantly clear is that Ohio was in a really good place for we had our emergency headquarters out there on 161, next to the airport. It was, headquarters for all agencies in the event there would have been a national, either a man-made disaster, so to speak. And so and then coordinating with all of the local emergency management. Every county has an emergency management team and leader, and we get a lot of federal dollars that we dispersed to the various counties, which got me around to meeting all the counties. So there was a tremendous amount of coordination, especially in the 3 C's, Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, and then the other larger municipalities. And what I learned, during that period of time, and it was something I couldn't talk about, was the plots and the people that ended up being, on watch lists and had to be dealt with, that were very sympathetic to the 9/11, culprits, and so that that changed the whole complexion of how we did that type of undercover work and surveillance and information gathering and sharing of information in this country. And I was fortunate to be involved in it and become the Ohio, liaison with Homeland Security. Something never thought about doing.
9/11, and you're the top criminal justice advisor to the governor of Ohio and head of the most important department related to criminal justice at a time when this country literally changed forever. Do you remember where you were on 9/11?
Yeah, I was in my office in Columbus at Public Safety. Exactly a week later, I was on the ground at New York City at World Trade Center, because the day it happened, the the rescue and recovery contingency that we had in Ohio, that was made up of officers, and first responders from so many different municipalities in Ohio that were specially trained, marshaled their assets and got on the road and drove, because their specialty was search and recovery, for survivors. So they went out the next day. They were, in New York. They had set up a shop at the Javits Center, and they were involved in, the very grueling responsibility of being on site and doing what they do. They never found a survivor, so that was extremely emotionally and psychologically telling on them. So anyway, I went there in the state plane, and we got letters from all their children and an Ohio flag, and Cheryl's cookies, which was a real, gourmet cookies. She donated, tons of cookies, and Grader's Ice Cream donated, crates in dry ice packed, for the men and women that were there. And so I brought all that to New York City, and went to their, where they were stationed at the Javits Center, and it was kind of like a USO visit, telling them how much we appreciated them. And it was, I will never forget being there. It was emotional for me. I still get kind of choked up when I think about what I saw. But the reaction of the men, they just wanted the letters from their families, and they just went off and sat on their bunks, and they just needed a diversion from what they had been doing. And I saw ambulances and police cars and fire, first responder vehicles, and they were just stacked up one on top of the other, and they had to do that to get them out of the way, because they had been crushed by the falling debris of the World Trade Centers. And those were just alongside of the road. Again, I will never forget being there firsthand, and seeing what we did.
Chief Justice, it's a credit to your career that we have spent so much time today talking about your career, and we haven't gotten to probably the most important part of your career, and that is a justice and Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. So in our next episode, we're going to talk about your judicial career. So stay tuned for our next episode when we talk with Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor about her phenomenal, and I mean phenomenal, judicial career. Stay tuned.